In the energy space, I've probably got a decade of being involved in what was more broadly termed sustainability. And over the last decade, I think that's converged and focused more and more on energy. I have a background in partners in performance. I've worked as both a consultant many moons ago and then recently joined 2 years ago to lead up their energy transition practice.
I look at my role with Partners in Performance as just the energy principal. So I like to get deep into the technical side of this well. And so one thing we do know is that renewables are getting cheaper and cheaper and getting competitive with all other energy forms. So how can an organisation effectively take advantage of this technology?
What I've noticed over the last decade, but definitely in the last 12 to 18 months, is the amount of focus that's been coming from investors and shareholders for businesses to start having a credible plan to reduce their overall emissions profile. I think that pressure has resulted in the economics of the technologies that are available from a renewable perspective coming down the cost curve. I think part of it's scale, part of it's scope, and part of it's a real focus of investment dollars in innovation. So I think that's why it's accelerated as fast as it has in the last 18 months. The piece around now getting businesses to how can they take advantage of that, I think the first step is to actually develop a business case where everybody is able to understand why the economics and the drivers have changed. We often will talk to clients and hear we looked at that 3 years ago or 4 years ago, etc., and it didn't quite stack up. And as I mentioned, it's been quite dynamic. It's moved very quickly. And when you sit today and look at what's possible from an economics perspective of renewable technologies, I think getting the broader business aligned as to what is possible, what are the economics, and what would be the roadmap that they could actually put in place to go out and implement a pathway, sort of the sequential side of that as well. I think those three things, bringing it all together, and I think a business case is a really good place to start, because that then enables everybody to air their previous experiences and then get some more clarity and agreement from the business as to where they should focus on, prioritise.
So with all these trends happening, when do you think organisations should start thinking about making the switch to renewables and embracing this new technology?
Where we are heading towards as a global business community is one where the expectations from all various different stakeholders, whether it's investors, shareholders, employees, governments, your broader social license to operate, you will need to have a credible plan in place with regards to your renewables. So the sooner you start thinking about it and start understanding it and getting a clarity and agreement on what's the best pathway for your specific business, the better. I think the way you think about it and doing it in quite a disciplined, structured approach so that you end up with a robust fact base that everybody's able to test and then in some instances challenge and get to a point where we agree what the fact base looks like, and then we can start thinking about, so the what is well understood, and then we can move into the how. So I think the sooner you start thinking about it and get a confirmed view of what your business is able to do and what they should actually start to go out and put in place from an action plan, the better.
If they get on with renewable energy and they start incorporating that into the business, what else is beyond that? So how else can organisations reduce their emissions further once they've got this renewable energy into their energy system?
When you define energy is actually both power and fuel. So I think many of us, when we think of renewable energy, we just think purely of the electricity side. So once you are able to renew your electricity and start getting low cost, reliable, high renewable penetration electricity, then what it starts to make sense to do is how can we look to electrify everything? So that means displace the use of fuels in our overall business with electricity. Now, it doesn't make sense to do that if you've currently got a expensive high fossil fuel power supply. But once you build a low cost, reliable, renewable power supply, it starts to make sense to actually let's electrify what we can and then go that further step. Now, to give you a tangible example of that, we've done some work recently for a mining company where we did the business case for them around how they can renew their electricity supply. Now that they've done that, they are now also looking at how can they expand and start to electrify their ore movement technologies. And whilst I'd say the business case is very compelling for your stationary electricity, There is still some technology innovation coming in the oil movement technology space. However, there's some moves you can make today that will be no regrets moves that will set you up to enable further electrification and improvements in the oil movement technology space. So you probably need to start at a macro level, understand what makes sense from a priority perspective over the next 5 years, do something which is credible, start moving the business towards a low carbon operation for the future. And then you can start thinking about electrification, and then potentially, in some instances where you may have been using trucks for your oil movement, once you start to electrify with renewables and then move towards autonomous, there's some switch outs that you can actually make with regards to what you're currently using for your oil movement technology. So it's a dynamic, exciting space, but I think absolutely building a business case and a bit of a robust understanding of what's possible today will help set you up for the future.
Sounds like a big year for the energy transition practice at Partners in Performance. But thank you very much for that insight, Pete.